world's mining industry converged on the mother city in the past few days, for past week or so, and it was a full house indeed. Peter Major, who is our mining guru, was there. Well, where else would you expect him to be? And he's giving us feedback of what went on and whether it was worthwhile for all those people to come from so far away. Busy week for you, Pete. The mining in Indaba just seems to get bigger and bigger.
It does, Alec, and it's actually 5 mining in Indaba spread over 2 weeks. So my schedule's been very changed the last 13 days, trying to run and touch base with all 5 Indabas, absorb as much as you can out of them. And they bring down a lot more people than just the ones that attend. So you have to spend a lot of your time going to different hotels and venues outside the Indaba to see the people and the companies you want. But there's so many good presentations at each of these Indabas. It's like a kid stuck in Disneyland, and he's only got 8 hours to see 30 days worth of rides and exhibits. And yeah, I've really been stretched. And it's been really productive for me. Everything that anybody could ever want in mining has been here. It's fabulous. They've all done a great job. All 5 Indabas. I run out of superlatives. I can't thank them enough. And it's super value for money. I know this sounds like paid advertising, Alec, and it's not. But I don't know where anybody would get more value for money. And that's why so many foreigners come here. They readily admit, even though the hotels, I'm sad to say, they've reinvented the word gouging and all the things that come with it. But even then, nobody could get better value for money as far as seeing and experiencing and talking with the companies and the corporations and the services and the suppliers and the government officials. It was all here.
Talk about the government officials, just South Africans or from all over the continent or indeed all over the world?
All over the continent. If I had one query, it would be some of the presentations were on companies completely off the continent. There were presentations of projects in North America, projects in Australia, a couple in Asia. But I don't know if that's because you have to take whoever sponsors you. You know, this is about sponsorship. That's what funds it. You know, they don't make all their money just off the attendees. I don't think that covers even half of it. But that was a minor irritant because I'm really dredging to find an irritant because I can't find anything wrong with all 5. And that was a very, very small part of all 5 Indabas that I saw a few companies that weren't on the continent. Excuse me. See,
somebody brought a lurgy for you just
yeah, that's right for mentioning that. Yeah, and I'm nitpicking on that, and I'm going to stop. Mm-hmm. You cannot nitpick what the 5 Indabas in the last 13 days had. I never saw so many happy faces.
And the mood generally very upbeat, one would presume.
Very upbeat. We've heard before, since we've had the GNU government here in South Africa, is really toned down outlandish actions by the government. I think it's toned down the outlandish statements that the ANC and a lot of the other parties made. And the high metal prices, you know, look at our rand from 19.5 to 15.8. You know, who would have imagined? And just, I don't know when we've seen a lack of disasters like we have now. Water seems to be hitting the headlines, but electricity is off the screen. You know, it's not an issue. We've gone, a year with no load shedding. So if you had 10 or 15 boxes to tick about what was great this year, they were all. I don't think in my 32 Indabas that I've seen these kinds of planets all lining up together. So many favorable factors, Alec.
32 Indabas. That's 32 years at least that this gathering has happened. And would you say this was the biggest ever?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And it's got to be the most well-attended. I've never seen nearly this many displays. They fully filled up both the giant conference centers at Cape Town. Both. You could stand back at the entrance to the second one, look down on the floor level, and I think it went 3 more levels up, and there were banners there was exhibits, and there were people on all the levels. And I've never seen so many food stalls, so many coffee, hot chocolate stalls, and it's all gratis. It's all part of your ticket. 4 presentations going on simultaneously for the whole 4 days. That would be a negative. There were too many presentations and people talking and panel discussions I really wanted to attend, even if I just spent all my time at the one big Indaba. If you've got 3 or 4 going simultaneously, you've already missed out.
And what about the South African appearance, or did South Africa put its best foot forward, use the opportunity of having the whole mining world, or who matters in the mining world, together in one place at one time in your country?
No, I don't believe they did, Alec. And I don't believe they even tried to. And if I can use a benchmark, it would be the Australian hosting the Olympics a few years ago. Now, that might be too strong of a benchmark, but if you remember that Olympics, I think they set the record. They staged such an amazing Olympics, and their team did so well. They were up there, I think, in the top 5 throughout most of the 2 weeks. And everybody said it almost exhausted them. They haven't kept up with all that sponsoring of athletics since then, but they really thought, we're going to leave something memorable. Well, South Africa doesn't have to go to that extreme, but they are hosting the 3rd largest mining Indaba in the world. And it's the most popular, I'm told, by almost all the delegates. They tell me Toronto is just way, way too big. Australia is bigger than ours, but not as diverse and doesn't cover as much ground and just isn't as fun. And so if we know that, why don't we body slam this thing? Why doesn't government say, we want extra booths, extra stalls, and we want a plethora? I think we got more government ministers in this country than any other country. Well, why don't we say, hey, half of you guys go down to Cape Town for a week. Have your own stall at the Indaba. Walk around the Indaba. See if you can pick up any ideas. See if you can pick up the vibe, the buzz. Why is the DRC getting all this attention? Why is Zambia getting so much attention? Why are they getting so much money? Go down there and see if you guys can divine why. You don't have to listen to loudmouths like me saying why I think those countries are getting tens of billions of dollars and we're getting passed over. I think having the government, all the ministers here for 4 days would accomplish a lot more than having them do their normal job during the rest of the year.
So what presence did South Africa have, if not half the cabinet, as you would recommend?
They did have stalls, and the people in the stalls, I think they made an effort. But you got to realize, if you got a stall in a giant auditorium that has 150 other stalls, well, you can get lost in the rush. And there are some much poorer African countries that had larger stalls than us and that had them close to the entrances. So as soon as somebody walks in, they see it. I just think we can't just show up and think that's all we need to do. We have to go back to saying we're benchmarking ourselves against the world, and we want to stand out against the world. We don't want to just be one of 200 countries. We don't want to be one of 200 mining countries. Let's act and show the world what we really are. I think there could be a much bigger effort than that. And Gwede Montage, it's great he's down here. He's down here longer than he used to be, but why not make yourself totally available for 3 or 4 solid days? It is a lot of work, but I hope it's not because they don't have anything new to offer. I hope it's not because they're on their 4th iteration or 5th iteration of the MPRDA, and all indications are they're trying to double down. I give them credit. I've heard very little about them on the MPRDA since the Minerals Council came out saying you did not take anything into account that we've been working on hard and discussing with you for the past year or so. It does look like our Minerals Department has backed up and is not just rushing this the latest legislation through as they wanted it. It looks, and I hope, like they are taking into account what the Mineral Council put together, because that represents almost all the mining companies in the country, and a lot of those are international countries. And sure, everybody's biased. Everybody's trying to do what's best for him, putting forward this is what would really work great. But take that into account and balance it and just say, does this help the country? If it does, what's wrong with it? If this is going to create more jobs and bring in a few $1 billion, maybe this piece of legislation should be worked on, cut out, expanded upon. Yeah, I'd love to hear that. I'd love to hear there's a working session with government to say, we've taken all your comments into account. Let's have a roundtable because we'd like to implement these. We just want to know more about them.
From the Joburg mining Indaba, which I did attend, there were a few themes that I'd be interested to know if there were any updates on them. The cadastre, which is a big word that most people outside of mining wouldn't have a clue what it's about. Perhaps you can let us know, was there anything spoken about that in this very fancy data system or online system where all of the opportunities are going to be available for everyone to see?
Gibberish, Alec. That's all I heard was gibberish. Yeah. Weak, nonsensical excuses why it's not progressing. You're right. This came up first week of October in the Joburg mining Indaba, and they could call that the South African mining Indaba because you were there. The majority of that Indaba covers South Africa, a little bit peripherally, Namibia, Botswana, maybe Zimbabwe around us, but not much peripherally. This Indaba, this is the African Indaba. So there was nothing new. And South Africa is just one country out of 55 in Africa. And you could see it at this Indaba. They were just one of the players. They weren't the standout player. They weren't the giant. They were just one of the players. And to put it in context even more, figure out the Minerals Council releases figures that shows what our production is every year, what our labor component is. It doesn't even include a lot of our minerals, fluorspar, phosphate, base metals, heavy mineral sands. There's a lot of items missing there. I don't know why the government doesn't include those. But even if I try and factor in my calculations, what those are, we come up with about $50 billion. But hell, this is in an era of good prices. And we've oscillated around that 50 billion now for 10, 20 years. So it means there's no growth. Now look at the Congo that literally had zero copper production 25 years ago. They were down to 30,000 tons a year. O'Keefe Copper could put out 30,000 tons a year. And here that's all the whole DRC did 25 years ago. They're somewhere over 3.3 million tons of pure copper. They are a solid number 2 now. And Friedland likes saying, they're breathing down Chile's back. Not quite, but they passed Peru. Peru did 3 million tons the last few years. They have zoomed by there. Peru's now down to 2.9. Chile is about 5.5 million tons, trying for 6. Now, the DRC, if you got 3.3 million tons of copper, and copper is $13,000 a ton, that's $40 million. So DRC is producing $40 million worth of copper, and South Africa is producing 50 billion compared to 40 billion for DRC. And that's our iron ore, our gold, our PGMs, our chrome, our manganese, our coal, our heavy mineral sands, our diamonds. We're producing this wide range of all these minerals. And yeah, it sounds good. We did 50 billion last year. And here's the DRC. And sometimes we're not even sure it's a country. It's many provinces with warlords. It's got a full-time terrorist revolution going on there on its eastern border with Rwanda. And yet, just their copper. So if you add in their gold, I think they're already passing us. Add in the cobalt and the gold. DRC's passed us.
So if you look at that as a man in the moon coming down to South Africa, you'd almost say, well, it's peaceful in South Africa. There's so many advantages that you have. And yet this place, which has no government, which has all chaos, is doing better than you're doing. So there's got to be a massive obstacle that's stopping people from going forward. And I think we all know that with government. Was there any, and regulations, was there any sign that any pennies are starting to drop within the South African government, this government of national unity, that they see the opportunities are vast, that there are so many people who could be employed, so much revenue that could be generated for the country by our mineral endowment? Was any of that evident at the Mining Indaba week and a half?
It wasn't to me, Alec. And I'm not the best barometer. I spread myself very thin. I'm just one guy. I try to be unbiased. But no, I didn't pick up that. And it's unlikely to pick it up because this government has shown us for the last 25 years since they introduced the MPRDA, which is in 2002. They've shown us they're only going one way, and it's down in the rut. Each time they have another version of the MPRDA, it looks more punitive than the other. And whatever happened, this was only going to be for 10 years, and that was going to take into account all the historical injustices, and then they were going to get rid of the MPRDA. Well, boy, we now know it is welded. BEE is welded. There is no talk of even mellowing out on that. So no, I didn't pick up any indication. And unfortunately, all the people I chatted to, they had more negative stories about South Africa, mainly on licenses, on communities, on BEs. They had many more negative stories on South African mining than they had positive stories. The positive story was, thank heavens, load shedding's not going on. There's a little positive story with Glencore on the ferroalloy side, that government / Eskom is going to try and give them 62 cents a kilowatt hour instead of the, what is it, 224 that you and I pay, which, most countries is vice versa. The consumer gets a better deal than industry. Here, the consumer pays 4 times as much, I guess, for inefficiency. But that was a little bit of good news. And Glencore pointed out, hey, the government's really trying. They're talking. We've got all members of parliament, all the ministries are doing their bit, but it's still talking. And then behind the scenes of that conversation, they say, we just need some action. We've been talking for 3 months. And look at Moselle. That Moselle smelter is going to close because Eskom and Mozambique can't come to sustainable terms. And they've told us, South 32 says, when that thing closes, it is not going to reopen. Glencore told us almost all the furnaces that have closed in this country, ferromanganese, ferrochrome, will never open again. Impossible economically to even think of reopening any of those closed furnaces. So now, no, government hasn't got the message that they're the people most responsible for mining going down and lack of investment in mining. And if they had that message, then hopefully they would do something about it.
If I understand you correctly, there are people with the will, people who are working in there, they're doing their best, they're working hard, but the ideology is killing them. You can't be a free enterprise person in a communist system. You needed a Deng Xiaoping in China to say, I don't care what color the cat is, as long as it catches mice. If it's a capitalism cat or a communism cat, let's just catch mice. And my goodness, did that very simple analogy change and transform their fortunes. In South Africa, we haven't yet realized that the cat that we have is not catching any mice. And in fact, the mice are just going off into other parts of the continent or the world.
Yeah, it's just, there's a real ceiling, and it's policy and regulation. And until they can break through that whether it's, I don't believe it's ideology. When I hear people say, oh yeah, we got the wrong ideology, I think our ideology is pure smoke and mirrors for nefarious activities. Whether they call it socialism, communism, democratic socialism, they just, I think it's all smoke and mirrors, Alec. But our policies are not smoke and mirrors, our legislation. So companies cannot break what's on paper there. They cannot do that, or they're open to legal action. And companies do not willingly want to break any country's laws. So why can't a country just make laws that suck in money like China did, like DRC did, like Zambia did? It can be
Suck
done.
in money
Stroke of a pen.
and create jobs. I have to support you there. I had a chat yesterday with Dr. Theo Diago, who's a very, very esteemed internationally acknowledged agriculturalist. And he said the problem that's going on with foot and mouth disease is that the companies, the Brazilian and Turkish companies who supplying it, say they can land it at the farms for 55 Rand, but the government wants to control it and then will land it at the farm at 300 Rand. So between the 55 and the 300, there are so many snouts in the trough that it's now just got beyond a joke. They don't know how far they've pushed it, which is ridiculous. The system cannot carry this. The Guptas were similar. We've been through that state capture, but the capturing of South Africa has to end at some point in time, one would hope. The other issue I was hoping that you would be able to give some good news on is the exploration side. Was there any breaking of that, given that South Africa hasn't had exploration or decent exploration for decades now? There did appear at the Joburg mining in Indaba to be some move in the right direction there.
I haven't noticed any difference, Alec, and it's such a small amount now. Yeah, I didn't hear anybody saying we're putting this much in that we weren't going to put in before. It just never came up. Again, I'm not the best barometer out there, but yeah, nobody I knew was launching any more exploration. You saw headlines saying BHP is giving $500,000 to Orion Resources to do exploration, geophysical exploration outside of their current Priska operation. But, $500,000, please. We're talking countries like Canada and Australia. They're doing $2.3 billion worth of exploration spend. And geez, what's China spending? What's America spending? What are all the medium countries spending? So no, there's no plan how to increase that because it's got this permanent ceiling, this permanent policy, regulatory, legislative ceiling. And if you don't alter that, you can't change all these things below it that need to be changed.
Transnet?
I sat at 2 days of Transnet presentations. I've never heard more willingness from the CEO down, but it's coming off I don't want to say a low base. Eskom and Transnet have a very bad balance sheet. So they can't really fund very much. And they need others to come in and help fund them. But people say, we're not putting in any money unless we get to control how that money is spent. And not only do we want to control how it's spent, we want to know the framework that it's going to be spent. If Transnet would free up more railroads and say, guys, you can take this whole railroad over, and here's reasonable parameters. But if you say you can take this whole railroad over for just a couple, 2 or 3 years, and then we have the option of taking it back, or you can take it over, but you got to use these components of us. It's painful. Now, Transnet seems to be going more laissez-faire than Eskom. They do seem to be working better with the industry players, but it's cumbersome. There's committees with dozens of people on it. It's almost unmanageable, Alec. And that's what's different. This whole ANC government believes not just in rent seeking, but they seek to dominate and they seek to control every aspect of spend and rights. They want rights to everything. They want to control how things are spent. But there were a lot of positive talks and slides that Transnet has shown how they're increasing traffic volume, taking it back from the roads like they never should have lost. That is great. Michelle Phillips, the most exuberant person ever, such a change from previous Transnet CEOs. almost too good. But I don't think anyone's trying harder than her, and is easier to work with, according to the people I've spoken to. So Transnet gets big points for making the effort, and it's
What
showing
about
results.
what about the story of green energy, of the just energy transition, of the talk on critical minerals? This morning we have Donald Trump saying that the US military is now going to be promoting coal-fired power stations. He wants electricity for the military to be bought in from coal-fired power stations. They're going to be upgrading 6 coal-fired power stations. A complete anathema. 180 degrees from where the Americans and indeed certainly the South Africans are looking. Was there a sense of reality coming from there, or a sense of great concern that Trump is, when he leaves, he's going to have messed up the place?
Yeah, I think there's more concern. This guy needs a reality check. And you wonder what prompts him to make these kind of statements. And I always wonder, does he have somebody do a quick and dirty economic analysis on these before he says them? Because if you're an army, you're all over the world, but you do have big bases. So what does that mean? Wherever he has a base and there's a closed coal plant, he wants them to reopen. Well, okay. But is there a mine close by? Are you going to truck your coal in? Is the mine caved in, or was it shut down and rehabilitated? What's it going to take to get the coal to the mine? And as far as the military, once it leaves the country, well, are they going to take coal-fired power plants with them? Yeah, his statements, they often sound like something we've heard coming from our leaders, Alec. They're these random statements that get the headlines. Either they're meaningless or they're preposterous. And you just wonder, that's why we say, was there an adult in the room when that script was written? Shouldn't he be forced to read that script in front of somebody just to policy check him? But Donald's usually thin on details, big on headlines, thin on details.
But at the Indaba itself, was there a sense of concern that the transition, or the realization that global warming is a real thing, is now being swept aside? And it's almost as though Trump wants to dirty the atmosphere with the way that he's going forward. We can understand on the one side, that you don't go overboard like some of the countries have, but he's almost saying, I'm going to drill baby drill and burn baby burn.
Look, there's less talk of ESG than I've heard in years. There was less talk about dirty coal. We know quite a few of the large banks have now reopened their coal financing desk. But I was speaking to a couple people into coal, and they're saying a lot of Europe still isn't going to fund it. You can fund it internally. You can get private equity to do it, but the European banks still won't do it. But American banks are now funding it. And I think Africa is realizing, whatever talk it is, we're going to do what's best, and China is leading the way. China's leading the way in alternative energy, but they're still building coal-fired power plants. They're still generating more electricity from coal than they ever have. And they don't try and hide the fact. They said, that's how we do a fair and economic transition. As soon as solar panels and windmills can do it more economically and more environmentally sustainably than coal, they will take a bigger percentage. And they are taking a bigger percentage, but it just shows their economy is growing. So their coal production keeps going up, but it's not the same percentage of overall as the others. I've always thought, of all countries, that's what Africa needs to do. They need to do what is the most economically reasonable for their country to get their standard of living up, their industrialization up. And that doesn't mean burn dirty coal with no scrubbers on your smokestacks. But every technology in the world has been utilized on burning coal much cleaner than ever before. We've seen it on automobiles. We've still got internal combustion engines running most of our automobiles, and they're producing 5-10% of the pollution they did 20, 30 years ago. And coal plants are no different. So sure, you can clean the things up. You don't just shut them down point blank. And here's a country that's on a GDP of the USA and the rest of the world at not even 10%. But so answer your question, it was not on the top plate. Clean energy, a fair transition, ESG, it was noticed by its absence.
When one leaves the World Economic Forum in Davos, you got a pretty good picture of where the world's economy is likely to go, because you get all these people together in a room at one point in time and they swap notes, and you can kind of, if you listen, you can gauge it. If you take that position from the mining Indaba, what is mining going to look like for the rest of the year, given all the inputs that you've had over those 13 days of engagements?
That's an easy, nice question. I never thought you'd ask it. I think it's positive on all fronts, Alec. Even if these metal prices come off, they are so high, and mining is at the forefront of the world now. We've seen it in the US, we've seen it in Europe, and everything is going to be better this time next year. There's going to be more jobs and more mines open than closed. I'm convinced, throughout all of Africa, and I include South Africa. I think despite our horrible legislation and policies and government ministers, the willingness is there on all fronts to increase it. And the metal prices are leading the way. So, yeah, I think we're going to have more people employed in mining this time in this country and definitely all the countries north of us. And I think all countries are going to show increased production, even including this country. Smaller increases than above us, but honest, maybe I'm going to get blindsided, but just everything is lining up great.
And if you could make one change to the MPDRA, one change that would bring money flooding into South Africa to give us the kickstart that the country and the economy really needs, what is the one change you would make?
Alec, it's a toss-up between cleaning up the Department of Mineral and Energy, on the licensing side, and throwing out BEE. If I could only do one, I think if you threw out all the BEE legislation, that you're forced to have a 30% partner, that you're forced to spend 70% through BEE companies, I think that would bring in more money than if you say we've cleaned up our licensing system and you will get your licenses within 30 days. Because everybody's talking about the difficulties with BE, and everybody's talking about the difficulty. We still wait 5 years for a mining license. We still wait 2 years for prospecting. We're still fighting with this. So yeah, it's neck and neck. I think the BE would make the biggest difference, but you'd want to follow it with that mining license. Just straighten that out. So I've given you two and you only asked for one.
Peter Major, spending the last 13 days, as he said, in Cape Town, where he lives, looking at engaging with the movers and shakers in the world, of which he is very much one. And I'm Alec Hogg from biznews.com.